Welcome to Bella's World, where real-life drama meets spicy secrets. Subscribe to never miss a new story.
I didn't expect that accepting my ex's wedding invitation would destroy my current relationship, but here I am, 6 months later, single, and somehow I'm the villain for trying to be a mature adult about my past instead of being petty and jealous like my boyfriend wanted me to be. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what happened after the divorce, after the therapy sessions, after I thought I'd learnt my lesson, because apparently I hadn't learned anything at all. It started when I got the invitation in the mail from my ex Derek, who I dated for 3 years before we broke up 2 years ago. The invitation was beautiful and expensive looking, with gold foil lettering announcing his wedding to someone named Sophia. Inside was a handwritten note saying he hoped I could be there to celebrate this important day with him, and that it would mean a lot to have me there as someone who had been such an important part of his life. I was actually happy for Derek when I saw the invitation because our breakup had been amicable and mature. We'd simply grown apart and realized we wanted different things in life, but there had never been any drama or hard feelings between us. He was a good person who deserved to find happiness and love, even if it wasn't with me. I'm Claire, by the way, and I'm 28 years old. Well, 29 now, and I work as a graphic designer for an advertising agency. I pride myself on being mature and rational about relationships and not letting emotions cloud my judgment the way some women do. At least, that's what I told myself back then. When I showed the invitation to my boyfriend Mark, he immediately got this weird look on his face and asked why Derek would invite me to his wedding. I explained that Derek and I had remained friendly after our breakup and that we still texted occasionally to check in on each other's lives. Mark said he didn't understand why I would want to go watch my ex-boyfriend get married to someone else. Mark is 30 and works in construction, and honestly, he's always been a bit more emotional and dramatic than I prefer in a partner. Or so I thought at the time. Now I realize he was just normal. He had normal reactions to abnormal situations, while I was the one living in some fantasy world where everyone could just be friends, and exes could celebrate each other's weddings without any complications. I told Mark that I thought it was actually really mature and healthy that Derek wanted me there, and that it showed we'd both moved on from our relationship in a positive way. I said I was curious to meet Sophia and see Derek happy with someone who was better suited for him than I had been. Mark said he thought the whole thing was weird and inappropriate, and that he didn't want me to go. That's when I realized Mark was being completely unreasonable and insecure about my past relationship. I explained that Derek and I were ancient history, and that attending his wedding would be a way to show that I'd moved on completely and was genuinely happy for his new beginning. I said refusing to go would make me look petty and immature, like I was still bitter about our breakup when I wasn't. We had a huge fight about it that night where Mark kept saying I was prioritizing Derek's feelings over his feelings and that I was being selfish and inconsiderate. I tried to explain that this wasn't about Derek at all, but about me being a mature adult who could handle seeing people from my past move on with their lives. Mark said if I went to the wedding, he would consider it a betrayal of our relationship. Looking back now, I can see how desperate I sounded, how I kept circling back to this idea of being mature, like it was some kind of shield I could hide behind. But at the time, I was convinced that Mark was the problem, that his jealousy was a character flaw that I shouldn't have to accommodate. The morning of the wedding, Mark told me that if I went through with attending, he would consider it the end of our relationship. He said he couldn't be with someone who would prioritize her ex-boyfriend over her current boyfriend, and that my going to the wedding proved I wasn't ready for a serious, committed relationship with him. I told Mark he was being manipulative and controlling by giving me ultimatums, and that if he couldn't trust me to attend a simple wedding, then maybe we weren't right for each other anyway. Those words haunt me now because they were so cruel, so dismissive of his legitimate concerns. So I went to the wedding despite Mark's threats and ultimatums because I knew I was doing the right thing by being mature and adult about my past relationship. The ceremony was beautiful, and Derek looked genuinely happy with Sophia, who seemed like a lovely, sweet woman who was perfect for him. I felt proud of myself for being there and showing that I could celebrate Derek's happiness without any jealousy or bitterness. I talked to several of Derek's family members who I'd known during our relationship, and they all seemed pleased to see me and said it meant a lot that I'd come to support Derek on his special day. During the reception, Derek came over to thank me for coming and said it really meant the world to him that I was there. He introduced me to Sophia, who was gracious and friendly, and said she'd heard so many wonderful things about me from Derek. I congratulated them both and said I could see how happy they were together. But then something unexpected happened during the reception that changed everything. Derek asked me to dance during a slow song, and while we were dancing, he started talking about our old relationship and how much I'd meant to him. He said seeing me at his wedding had brought back a lot of memories and made him realize how much he'd missed having me in his life. When the dance ended, Derek asked if we could talk privately outside, and even though I knew it was probably a bad idea, I agreed because I wanted to clear the air and make sure there were no misunderstandings about why I was there. We walked out to the garden behind the venue, and Derek immediately started telling me how conflicted he was feeling. He said seeing me at his wedding had made him question whether he was making the right decision, and that maybe we'd given up on our relationship too easily. He tried to kiss me and I pushed him away and told him he needed to go back inside to his wife and forget about whatever he thought he was feeling. I left the wedding immediately after that conversation, feeling sick and guilty and completely blindsided by what had happened. When I got home, Mark was waiting for me and could tell immediately that something had happened. I made the mistake of telling him the truth about Derek's behavior and what he'd said to me. Mark's face went completely white and then red with anger. Mark said he'd known something like this would happen, and that I'd been naive and stupid to think Derek just wanted me there as a friend. We had a huge fight where Mark said he couldn't be with someone who was so naive about other people's motives and who would prioritize being seen as mature over protecting her current relationship. That was 6 months ago, and Mark and I never recovered from the wedding incident. He broke up with me 2 weeks later, saying he couldn't get past the fact that I'd put myself in that situation despite his warnings. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that Derek's marriage to Sophia fell apart after only 3 months. Apparently, Derek had confessed to her about his feelings for me after the wedding, and she'd filed for divorce immediately. Several people told me that Sophia had said Derek spent their entire honeymoon talking about me and comparing her to me. Derek tried to contact me after his divorce to tell me he was sorry for putting me in an awkward position at his wedding. He asked if we could try again now that we were both single, but I told him absolutely not. I started therapy to try to understand why I'd been so determined to attend that wedding despite all the red flags. My therapist helped me realize that I'd been more concerned with how others perceived me than with protecting my relationship with Mark. I'd wanted people to think I was mature and secure, but really, I'd just been arrogant and naive. Doctor Martinez, my therapist, had a way of asking questions that made me squirm. Claire, she'd say, when you think about that night, what were you really trying to prove? And I'd always come back to the same answer, that I was different, that I was above the petty jealousies that plagued other women, that I was evolved. But evolved from what? She'd ask. And toward what? Those sessions were brutal because they forced me to confront the truth. I hadn't been trying to be mature. I'd been trying to be superior. I'd wanted to be the cool ex-girlfriend who could handle anything, who was so secure in herself that she could watch her ex-boyfriend marry someone else and feel nothing but happiness for him. But that's not what happened, is it? Instead, I'd walked into a situation that any reasonable person could have seen coming and then acted shocked when it blew up in my face. 6 months later, I ran into Mark at a coffee shop with a new girlfriend who seemed sweet and down to earth. They looked happy together, and I could see that she appreciated his straightforward, honest communication style that I'd dismissed as jealousy. When Mark saw me, he was polite but distant, and introduced me simply as someone he used to know. Watching Mark with his new girlfriend made me realize what I'd lost by being so stubborn about that wedding. But here's the thing I didn't expect. Seeing him happy with someone else brought up all the same feelings I'd claimed not to have about Derek's wedding. I felt jealous, possessive, hurt. All the emotions I'd insisted were beneath me came flooding back. And that's when I realized I hadn't learned anything at all. Because 3 weeks after seeing Mark with his new girlfriend, I did something that proved I was still the same person who'd gone to Derek's wedding against her boyfriend's wishes. I started showing up places where I knew Mark would be, not stalking exactly, but lingering. I'd go to the gym at the same time he usually went. I'd grab coffee at his favorite cafe on Saturday mornings. I'd drive past the construction sites where his company worked. I told myself I was just trying to process my feelings, that I needed closure, that I was working through my grief about our relationship. But really, I was doing the exact same thing I'd done with Derek's wedding, prioritizing my own emotional needs over everyone else's comfort and well-being. It took Mark's new girlfriend Jessica cornering me at the grocery store to make me realize how far I'd fallen. She was direct but not unkind when she said, "I know who you are, and I know what you've been doing. Mark told me about the wedding situation, and honestly, I felt bad for you. But this has to stop." I started to protest, to explain that I wasn't trying to cause problems, that I was just trying to work through my feelings. But Jessica held up her hand and said, "Look, I get it. Mark is a great guy, and losing him probably sucks. But you had your chance, and you chose to prioritize your ego over your relationship. Don't make the same mistake again by trying to sabotage his happiness now." The worst part was that she was right, and she wasn't even angry about it. She was just tired of having to deal with the mess I'd created, tired of having to be the mature one in a situation where the actual adult, me, was acting like a teenager. "He still cares about you," Jessica continued. "He's told me that he hopes you're doing well, and that he wishes things could have worked out differently. But Claire, you need to let him be happy. You need to let us be happy." Standing there in the cereal aisle, being gently but firmly told off by my ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend, I finally understood what Mark had been trying to tell me all those months ago. Some things aren't about being mature or evolved or above it all. Sometimes being mature means recognizing that your presence in a situation will cause more harm than good, even if your intentions are pure. I stopped going to places where I might run into Mark after that conversation with Jessica. Not because she'd scared me or threatened me, but because I finally understood that loving someone sometimes means staying away from them. It was a lesson I should have learned with Derek's wedding, but I'd been too proud to see it then. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my pattern of self-destructive behavior wasn't really about the men in my life at all. It was about my desperate need to be seen as exceptional, as different from other women, as above the ordinary human emotions that everyone else struggled with. "You've spent so much energy trying to prove you're not jealous or possessive or insecure," she said during one session, "that you've never actually dealt with the fact that you are those things sometimes. And that's okay, Claire. Everyone is." The hardest part of therapy was learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of trying to transcend them. When I felt jealous about Mark's new relationship, instead of telling myself I was above jealousy, I had to acknowledge that I was, in fact, jealous. When I felt regret about Derek's wedding, instead of trying to rationalize my decision, I had to sit with the fact that I'd made a mistake. It sounds simple, but for someone who'd spent years constructing an identity around being the rational, mature, evolved woman who was above petty emotions, it was revolutionary. A year after the wedding disaster, Derek reached out to me again. This time, he wasn't asking for a second chance. He was in therapy too, he said, and his therapist had suggested he make amends to the people he'd hurt during his brief marriage and messy divorce. "I know I put you in an impossible position," he said when we met for coffee. "Inviting you to my wedding wasn't about being mature or maintaining our friendship. I was having second thoughts about getting married, and I thought seeing you would either confirm that I was making the right choice or give me an excuse to back out." It was validating to hear him admit what Mark had suspected all along, but it was also devastating to realize how completely I'd been played. Not maliciously, maybe, but played nonetheless. "The worst part," Derek continued, "is that I knew you'd come. I knew you'd see it as some kind of test of how evolved you were, and I used that against you. I'm sorry." Sitting across from Derek in that coffee shop, I felt a mixture of vindication and shame. Vindication because Mark had been right about Derek's motives, and shame because I'd been so easy to manipulate. I'd been so invested in my image as the mature ex-girlfriend that I'd walked straight into a trap I should have seen coming from a mile away. "I cost Sophia her marriage," I said finally. "She deserved better than having her wedding day ruined by your unresolved feelings for your ex." Derek nodded. "She did. And I cost you your relationship with Mark, who sounds like he was a good guy who was just trying to protect what you had together." We sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd made a mess of multiple relationships because we couldn't face our own emotions honestly. "Do you think we would have worked out if we'd tried again?" Derek asked eventually. I thought about it seriously before answering. "No," I said. "We broke up for good reasons, and those reasons haven't changed. We wanted different things then, and we still want different things now. The only difference is that now we've hurt other people along the way." That conversation with Derek was a turning point for me, not because it gave me closure, I hate that word, but because it helped me understand that some mistakes can't be undone. Sophia's marriage was over. My relationship with Mark was over. Derek's relationship with himself as someone who could be trusted to make good decisions was probably over too, but acknowledging the permanent consequences of my actions was somehow freeing. I couldn't fix what I'd broken, but I could stop breaking new things. I could stop trying to prove I was above human nature and start accepting that I was subject to it like everyone else. I threw myself into therapy with a new commitment to honesty. When Dr. Martinez asked me what I really wanted from my relationships, I stopped giving her the answers I thought made me sound evolved and started telling her the truth. I wanted to be special. I wanted to be the exception to every rule. I wanted to be the woman who could handle anything, who never got jealous or insecure or petty. I wanted to be loved for being different from everyone else, rather than for being genuinely lovable as I actually was. "And how's that working out for you?" Dr. Martinez asked with a slight smile. "Terribly," I admitted. "It's working out terribly. It's been 2 years since Derek's wedding now, and I'm finally starting to date again. Not because I've found the perfect man, or because I've completely healed from my past mistakes, but because I've learned to be honest about who I am and what I want." When I started seeing David, a fellow graphic designer I met through work, I told him about the wedding situation early on, not because I thought it made me sound mature or because I was trying to prove how evolved I was, but because it was a significant part of my recent history, and I didn't want to hide it. David listened to the whole story without judgment and then asked, "What would you do differently now?" "I wouldn't go," I said immediately. "Not because I think attending your ex's wedding is inherently wrong, but because my boyfriend at the time asked me not to go, and I should have respected that. His feelings should have mattered more to me than proving how mature I was." David nodded. "That makes sense. Have you talked to Mark since then?" I shook my head. "He's happy with Jessica, and I think the best thing I can do for him is stay out of his life. Some apologies are best made through changed behavior, not through words." It was a relief to be dating someone who didn't see my past mistakes as a red flag, but as evidence of growth. David had his own relationship disasters to share, and we bonded over our mutual commitment to doing better in the future. 6 months into my relationship with David, I got another wedding invitation. This time, it was from my college friend Sarah, and her fiancé was Tom, someone I'd dated briefly during our sophomore year. It was nothing serious. We'd gone on maybe 5 dates before realizing we were better as friends, but technically, he was an ex. My first instinct was to RSVP yes immediately and prove to myself and everyone else that I'd learned my lesson and could handle this situation maturely. But then I stopped myself and really thought about it. Why did I want to go? Was it because I genuinely cared about Sarah and wanted to celebrate her happiness? Or was it because I wanted to prove something about how evolved I'd become? I talked it over with David, who listened carefully and then said, "What does your gut tell you?" "That I should go because Sarah is important to me and Tom is barely even an ex," I said. "But also that I should be suspicious of how confident I feel about that answer." David laughed. Okay, so what would be different about this situation compared to Derek's wedding? I thought about it. Well, Sarah is actually my friend, not just my ex trying to make some kind of point. Tom and I barely dated and have been friends for years since then. You'd be coming with me, so there's no question about my commitment to our relationship. And most importantly, you're not asking me not to go. Right, David said. And if I did ask you not to go? I'd stay home, I said without hesitation, because your feelings matter more to me than attending any wedding. It was such a simple answer, but it represented a complete shift in how I approached relationships. David's feelings mattered more than my reputation as someone who could handle any situation. Our relationship mattered more than proving how mature I was. We went to Sarah's wedding together, and it was lovely. Tom and I said hello, caught up briefly on each other's lives, and that was it. No private conversations, no dancing together, no drama. Just two people who dated briefly years ago being friendly at a mutual friend's wedding, while focusing on our respective current relationships. Here's what I've learned. Being mature in relationships isn't about proving you're above normal human emotions. It's about acknowledging those emotions and making decisions that prioritize the people who matter most to you right now. Mark wasn't being controlling when he asked me not to go to Derek's wedding. He was being vulnerable, telling me that the situation made him uncomfortable and asking me to choose our relationship over my need to appear evolved. I should have seen that as a gift, his honesty about his feelings, rather than as a character flaw I needed to overcome. Sometimes the mature thing to do is exactly what everyone else would do in your situation. Sometimes being ordinary is more loving than being exceptional. I lost a good relationship because I was more committed to my image than to my partner. Don't make the same mistake I did. Listen to the people who love you, even when what they're asking doesn't make you look as mature as you'd like to appear. Your ego will recover from not attending a wedding. Your relationship might not recover from attending one against your partner's wishes. Trust me, I learned this the hard way, so you don't have to.
Subscribe to never miss a new story.